for European Policy Studies. My name is Zach Pakin, and I am a researcher in the EU Foreign Policy Unit at CEPS in Brussels. Thank you for joining us all today for what promises to be a lively, interesting, and very timely discussion on recent developments within the triumvirate in the European Union in very rapid succession. Late last month, we saw the unveiling of the new traffic light German coalition government, in addition to a new Quirinale Treaty pact between France and Italy. And so we're going to be asking the question today what these developments portend for the future of EU foreign and security policy in the years ahead. And for this topic, we are very grateful to be joined by four excellent panelists today. First of all, Jean-Pierre Darny is Associate Fellow at the Fondation pour la Recherche Stratégique in Paris, as well as a Scientific Advisor at the IE in Rome, and an Associate Professor at the Université of the Côte d'Azur. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jean-Pierre.
Thank you, Zach. Hi to everybody.
And you're joining us from the airport, so thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. Ronja Kempen is Senior Fellow at the EU and Europe Division at SVP in Berlin. Thank you for being with us, Ronja.
Thank you for the invitation. Looking forward to our discussion.
Riccardo Alcaro is Research Coordinator and Head of the Global Actors Program at the Istituto Affari Internazionali in Rome, as well as the Head of the Joint Horizon Project, which aims to understand and strengthen EU foreign and security policy in a complex and contested world. Benvenuto, Riccardo.
Thanks, Zach. Happy to be here.
And last but not least is Paul Morias, who is the Director of the Barcelona Center for International Affairs, or CILOG. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you for the organization. A pleasure to be here.
Great pleasure. So, guten Morgen, or rather, excuse me, it's morning here in Toronto, but rather guten Tag and bonjour and buongiorno and buenos dias, buenas tardes. Thank you all for being with us. So, Jean-Pierre, I would like to start with you today, this afternoon. First of all, give us your sense. How does this new treaty between France and Italy, the new Quirinale Pact, how does it compare with the Elysée Treaty from the 1960s between France and Germany?
Well, that's a good question, and that's an important issue, this one, because this new treaty, the idea of the treaty was launched in 2017 by Emmanuel Macron replying to a journalist in September 2017, when there was an important issues, not to say somehow conflict between France and Italy. And a journalist said, well, why can we imagine something which could be comparable to the Elysée Treaty, the French-German one from 1963? And Macron said, well, that would be a good idea. I think we should work on that. That's exactly what happened. And then in 2018, and I mean, this treaty was started to cook between, let's say, the governments and some special commissions. So the first thing is that treaty, in a way, was born because there was somehow some domestic problems. Let's say Italian and French relations have gone through a very bad period between 2017, 2018, 2019. And then 2020, 2021, new Italian governments, new European reality. And so you finalize that treaty, and already what you're doing and other comments are showing that there are some side effects. It was made to heal the bilateral relation. It's also a way to strengthen somehow the French relation with important member states, but also for Italy to access to a new kind of, let's say, bilateral relations within the European Union. And that's something that Italians were not used to. But now you see that it has been, in a way, well received, both in France and in Italy. And that people are building upon this, in a way. Other kind of senses and topics, and such as your topic today, how could we contribute for CFSP? For sure, it wasn't fought like this, but yes, it's opening maybe a new cycle. And maybe with Paul we can talk, because a lot of people now are speaking about treaty with Spain and so far and so on.
Very nice. Thank you very much. And you mentioned that that this has been well received in Italy. I'm wondering how well received this treaty has been in the rest of the European Union, because there has been this sense throughout the Macron presidency that President Macron has been more interested in pursuing France's narrow interests rather than in genuinely Europeanizing certain issues. So is this new treaty a sign that France is open for business in terms of forging new partners and wants to listen to other EU member states, or rather is this another example of France putting French interests above anything else?
Well, I think my take would be the first one, because clearly France. The rapport between France and Italy is very paradoxical. When Macron was elected, he was clearly electing under the EU banner. He was saying, I'm a pro-European president, and so far and so on. And then a few days after, he stopped the agreement, the industrial agreement between STX and Fincantieri shipbuilders. It was a huge blow in the French-Italian relation at that time, also being eventually rightly interpreted by Italy as something really against Europe, un-European behavior, if you want. So that's the paradox. I guess that Macron and his team really understood that. Plus, they have also interest on the business side, in the business community, to go for more integration. So they know. I guess that, and Ronya can maybe comment on that. But French, they know that the French-German relation is fundamental, because in a way for them it always has been a kind of anchor within Europe. The French-German relation was an old power vision from de Gaulle, l'Europe des nations, blah, blah. But it was, and it has been since 1963, a very important, let's say, transmission and in a way positive, let's say, a channel for France with connecting with Germany, with a more federalist country, being connected with European Union and with the Commission, for example. So we can really think that it's this new French-Italian treaty. And by the way, they are already talking about Italian, Germans, and eventually, I wouldn't say treaty, but maybe agreements and so forth. This is shown as a way to complement the classic Commission policy, if you want, EU multilateral policy, with some more, let's say, deeply rooted member states, let's say, connection, which are, of course, very much needed to defend your interest. For example, between France and Italy, it's clearly industry, integration, and some foreign policy, meaning Libya and Africa. We can come back on that. But there are clear issues on that, bilateral issue. But obviously, they also affect and can positively influence the overall European Union compromise. And it's not against Germany. It really sees the French-German relation as an example. Clearly for France, I had several private talks with the diplomats who were writing that treaty, and it is clearly the model. Italians were more reluctant up to some weeks ago when Mario Draghi stepped in, and instead of some maybe reluctant diplomats, you had the political level who said, hey, it's good, and let's do a council of ministers together, and it was added like 2 days before the treaty was signed. So that's it.
I'll bring in Ronya in just 1 second, but just to follow up with you, Jean-Pierre, on this issue of Franco-German relations, we have seen some significant tensions in that relationship in recent years, whether it's on President Macron's comments surrounding NATO being "quote unquote" brain dead, or disputes over how to structure the future of the eurozone. So how is France's thinking on the future of the Franco-German axis actually evolving at this point? Does this new treaty not indicate a pivot away from Germany towards Italy, towards the Mediterranean? Rather than that was complementary to with the Franco-German relationship, as you're saying?
No, really no, because the French-German relation is now organic for French politics. You don't plan your policy, you don't look at Europe, you don't look at serious issues without talking to Germans, without taking the German position. Yes, there are some tensions. Yes, of course, you have some good times. You have some people like Merkel and Sarkozy. Apparently, they had a very good personal relation, and other people at some other times don't have the same quality, but it's working. But you have high civil servants which are working in Berlin and Paris in a mixed way, creating a sociology of the decision. And you have a huge cultural policy, you have a huge university policy. It's really, really working well. And in Paris, it's a priority. To add the Italian side, it's not a pivot. Yeah, it's very much needed because you had problems with Italy. Then maybe it adds a bit of competition. And if there is competition, well, maybe it benefits to France who had this idea of the treaty. But competition is different than the pivot, if you see what I mean.
Vanya, did this Quirinale Treaty land in Berlin with a thud or rather with a whimper?
Well, that's a good question. I'm tempted to say that we did not really take notice of the treaty, to be honest, because I think, at least from a Berlin point of view, I think we were too much focusing on the coalition negotiations going on, and who will become our new foreign minister, who will be the next finance minister. Will Scholz finally succeed to bring for the first time this traffic light coalition together. So I think we were much more inward looking in Germany, inside Germany, than taking note of what was going on in our immediate neighborhood. I just did a small press reading this morning in preparation, just to see, how the treaty was received in our major newspapers. And to be honest, you can find both interpretations. The one that was given by Jean-Pierre, which says, well, Franco-German relations are just outstanding, and no matter with whom France is going to align and sign treaties, this does not in any way interferes with the tightness, the closeness of the relations that we have been building up since 1963. And on the other hand, some were focusing on the timing of the signing of the treaty, although it was prepared already at a much earlier point in time, as Jean-Pierre has illustrated. But well, will the two, Rome and Paris, try to step in the vacuum that will probably materialize in the EU after Merkel is gone, was also to be found as an argument in some of the Germany's most popular newspapers.
Okay, well, we'll come back to the German coalition talks shortly, but let's just stick with the Quirinale Treaty for now and turn to Riccardo. And first of all, my apologies, but I neglected to mention at the outset of the panel that 3 of the 4 of you are affiliated with institutions that are involved in the joint project that Riccardo heads at YAI. We also have Jean-Pierre, who is affiliated with the FRS in Paris, as well as Paul at CIDOB in Barcelona, and CEPS ourselves are proud partners with this Horizon 3-year-long project. So great to have you all here taking part in this today. Riccardo, your sense of the Quirinale Pact, what are its main priorities? What stands out most to you?
Well, Zach, I think that to fully understand the rationale behind the Quirinale Treaty, you have to take account of 3 factors. I would call it actually a 3-pronged or 3-dimensional rationale. There is the first one is the one which Jean-Pierre mentioned and elaborated on. There is a strong bilateral component behind this treaty. Italy and France have very strong trade relations, very, very strong. The investment relationship is also very important, if somewhat asymmetric. France is a big investor. I think it's Italy. It's the first foreign investor in Italy, whereas Italy not so much in France. But still, industrial cooperation is super important in critical sectors, especially space. Jean-Pierre knows so much about that, defense. And therefore, there was a need, a demand for formalizing this kind of relationship in order to give it a more institutional and stable basis, so to speak. there was also a need to, I mean, Italy and France have been on, I mean, they have interests at stake in a number of areas in which, however, they have acted not exactly in unison. They have competing interests at times, or at least they frame their interests in a way which is not entirely compatible, or at least not entirely converging, for sure. Libya is one, I mean, first comes to mind, then migrations and so on. But both countries have realized that because both have an interest in these issues, migration, Libya, the Sahel, the East Mediterranean, the energy dimension, and because they have such competing or different or divergent sensitivities, injecting some institutional stability and dialogue into the relationship could only help. Then there is also the contingency, which again, Jean-Pierre already mentioned, of mending fences after this very brief but pretty troubled moments in the bilateral relationship between 2018 and 2019 especially. And with Draghi, again, as Jean-Pierre pointed out, we saw this kind of acceleration which already started during the second Conte government when the mainstream pro-EU Democratic Party replaced the Eurosceptic and mostly anti-French League as the Five-Star Movement's ruling coalition partner. So you already saw movement at the time, but with Draghi, you really saw the acceleration and the conclusion of this treaty. Because at the end of the day, neither Draghi nor Macron may be in power for long. Macron faces a difficult re-election campaign in the spring of 2022. Draghi might go on as prime minister, but the longest he can be prime minister is just over a year. So the idea of placing the bilateral relationship onto some more stable basis, into an institutional framework which compels the two administrations to interact on a regular basis, was also sort of an insurance policy in order to avoid that future vagaries that may emanate from the political cycles, either in France or in Italy or in both countries, might again jolt the relationship and shake it, and therefore create problems for both countries and for the EU itself. Let's not forget that this treaty establishes a really, really dense web of institutional interactions, including an annual intergovernmental summit, a great number of permanent or at least regular interministerial fora for dialogues, joint training programs for officials, exchange programs for officials. So on paper, it's quite a significant piece of diplomacy. The second component, and I'll be brief on these two components because I think we will be discussing this at length later on. The second component is very much related to the intra-EU balance of power. I do believe there is an element of counterbalancing here. And in that regard, the Quirinale Treaty is indeed targeted at Germany, but not directed against Germany. It's a way for Germany, for Italy and France to get some leverage over Germany, but not to impose their decisions on Germany, just to have a more constructive, just to have a more balanced interactions with a country which at times is extremely, extremely difficult for either France and Italy. It is also important to note that with this treaty, you are seeing how intergovernmental policy making is increasingly part of the EU policy-making processes, even though this intergovernmental policy-making process is extra EU treaty, of course. It is also important to note that this intergovernmental French-Italian policy-making process is framed by the treaty in terms that are not just compatible with the EU policy-making process, but as supplementing and complementing and strengthening them. And here we get to the third rationale, which is related to the promotion of EU policies on which France and Italy see eye to eye. The most important one, and I will not elaborate on that because we will do later on, is fiscal and macroeconomic governance of the eurozone, but also Macron's project, well, it's not really Macron's, but Macron's champion project for European strategic autonomy, which is something the Italian can feel comfortable with, so long as certain conditions are met, and they believe that if they do participate in the French, if they do take part in the French push for the EU to get more strategic autonomy, they can help Europeanize the debate, you know, stave off these constant accusations that France only wants to project its own foreign and security policy priorities on the EU. And look, even if that were true, France is not powerful enough to do so. And as Jean-Pierre said in the beginning, if you associate Italy in that process, then the result will hardly be reflective of only what the French say or think. So these three components, the bilateral dimension, the counterbalancing dimension, the EU dimension, make up the rationale of the Quirinale Treaty.
Thank you very much, Riccardo. Very enlightening. And I just want to push you a little bit before we move on, though, on this question of institutionalizing Franco-Italian cooperation beyond any given election cycle. You did mention the East Mediterranean, and that is a topic on which we've focused in recent webinars here at CEPS as well. Now, we've seen in recent months an alignment between France and Italy in the Eastern Mediterranean, but it was not always so. I mean, Italy had adopted a posture much more of hedging, certainly, even if you put the Libyan case aside, much more of hedging between France and Turkey in certain respects. And Italy does have its own strategy in the region, its own economic value chain in the region that is different from France's. So, you know, how much of a shift towards an institutionalized, long-lasting alignment between France and Italy does this treaty actually offer?
Well, look, I don't think that this treaty is meant to produce a constant alignment, strategic alignment between Italy and France. Just as the Elysée Treaty did not do that for Germany and France back in the 60s. The point is about institutionalizing interactions, is about creating institutional conflict prevention or conflict resolution mechanisms, so that whatever disagreements the Italians and the French may have, they can handle them first and hopefully preventively in certain institutional channels before they actually go public, with politicians reciprocally accusing one another of, you know, unfair or improper behavior. The East Med case is paramount in this regard, because it is an example of how the Italian and the French have moved closer to one another, notwithstanding the fact that they still have different sensitivities and different priorities and different opinions. Still, the Italians have become much more interested in a strong and constructive engagement of Egypt, which France is also very much fond of. The Turkish-Libyan deal under the former internationally recognized government of al-Sarraj, especially regarding the maritime, the exclusive maritime zones, did create some concerns in Italy. So to that extent, the Italian might have calculated that pushing back forcefully, as the French were doing against that, would still be in their interest. But it's not about a full strategic alignment. It's about making the bilateral relationship a constructive, even if not always amicable, interaction. I believe you are on mute, Zach, because we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now? Sorry, we seem to have had some technical difficulties on my other system. So moving over to Paul now, how are the Spanish thinking about the question of the Quirinale Treaty right now? Are they on the outside looking in, or do they view it as more of an opportunity?
Well, thanks. I mean, first, let's consider what Spain's position is in when it comes to the post-Brexit rapport de force. Let's put it this way, between the big member states within the Council, and of course, being left out of bilateral agreements, well, can be seen necessarily as something that might come at the expense of Spain playing a bigger role in EU politics after Brexit, which was at the beginning, let's say, the big motto, right? I mean, Spain will replace the UK and have one-to-one relations with the big member states, France and Germany, and then Spain will be also at a period when Italy was more unstable than it is today, and also at a time when Poland was being, and still is somehow, drifting apart from big consensus in EU politics. So the general feeling after Brexit was for Spain, well, this is the time for Spain to play a very important role within the Council. Then this perception comes together with the rivalry with Italy on whether who can be the biggest, right? Is Italy better suited to be the third in line? Is Spain better suited than Italy because it's more stable, at least in the last years, to play this bigger role? Well, to my understanding, both these aspects have been proven wrong, I would say. On the one hand, Spain has somehow, if not abandoned, yes, seen that there's no such thing as UK replacement within the EU after Brexit. So it is a question of new sort of alliances that are formed and that need to be formed for the different dossiers that need progress in EU politics. So it doesn't really make sense to join only one coalition of member states to advance every single interest in EU politics. And second, these alliances will be flexible depending on the topic. So Spain, and this is what the foreign policy strategy of Spain now says, has to foster flexible alliances within the EU when it comes to defending its own interests within the EU, being an integrationist power, being a pro-EU country in general. So that might bring you closer to France when it comes to, I don't know, fight against terrorism. It might bring you closer to Italy when it comes to migration challenges. It might bring you closer to Sweden when it comes to role of women and gender equality. So multiple ways of understanding alliances at the EU level. This doesn't mean that the rivalry, let's put it this way, with Italy is gone. No, I mean, there's always this sort of, we need Italy to be on board on Southern Europe matters. At the same time, we want to compete with Italy to be a strong voice within the EU. So this still exists, or is still part of the way Spain sees the rapport de force. But, and second reason why I think this has been proven wrong, is that Italy and Spain are today sharing more and more concerns on very important files in EU integration. So Italy and Spain have, if they work together, have more potential to be useful partners in current EU matters than if they want to compete one against another for having more influence at the EU level. So I would say that overall, the current leadership in Spain, the current government in Spain favors, on the one hand, these flexible alliances, this need for working together with multiple actors at different files and depending on the topic that we're discussing, one. And second, is best to have a positive sum approach with Italy when it comes to EU matters than a rival zero-sum understanding of who is stronger at EU level. So I think that both aspects are quite well, let's say, thought through at the Spanish level. But I'll leave it here for the time being, then, and we can get into more specific details on the different files that I was mentioning.
Well, and these flexible alliances that you mentioned, do you think that this will serve as a means of actually taking the process of EU sovereignty, strategic autonomy, integration, et cetera, forward? Or rather, does this just render the intra-EU space a little bit more confused, a little bit more disorderly, and therefore might lead to a less joined up rather than a more joined up EU foreign and security policy?
Well, I mean, this is where I wanted to head first when when thinking about this this webinar, right? I think right now the moment is quite good for the alignment of leaderships at the EU level, right? With the new German government not having only a conservative approach to EU matters, but also a proactive approach to EU matters and the files that are pending, migration, fiscal rules, or strategic autonomy, or European sovereignty, call it as you wish. So all these files are pending, and the German government has a more proactive approach to tackling these issues. France remains a question mark, of course, depending on the outcome of the elections. But let's say that Macron is re-elected. So again, one pro-European government in France. Italy, for what it lasts, also a pro-European government, and Spain a pro-European government, and Rutte also having changed his approach to many of the issues when it comes to EU integration. So I would say that this is the first time really that you have the big member states somehow in their leaderships aligned for fruitful discussions on the future of the EU. But that is what has been said so far, and I agree on this. Also, what I would put forward is the idea that current rules are increasingly being questioned by these same leaderships and by these same countries. And the understanding that reform is what comes after, this is the new thing that I think we need to pay attention in EU integration matters in the following months. Why? Because we agree that after Belarus, after Morocco, weaponizing migration, and after the refugee crisis and its continuation on different forms, these rules are no longer valid. So they need reform. They need something new to emerge if the current prospects of asylum and migration policies do not work. So need for reform here. Fiscal rules, same thing. They are on hold, they are suspended, but no one is really saying we need to go back to pre-coronavirus times and the rules, the fiscal rules that were in place, and the Stability Pact and so on. Somehow they need to be reformed. We don't know exactly how, but they need to be reformed. Strategic autonomy, European sovereignty. It is also time for some decisive push on this front. So it's not only a question of leaderships that are, let's say, on good terms for EU reform, it's also that on the big files, there is a general sense that the current rules don't work. And this is a very ripe moment, I would say, for an overhaul of the thinking on where EU integration is heading. And that is something, that is an opportunity that I would say that we haven't faced for the last 10 to 15 years at the EU level. The convergence of right leaderships, pending France, and the right need for reform. So if we combine this, prospects for reform at the EU level are quite important, and I wouldn't miss that opportunity, or I think it would be unwise to miss that opportunity now.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. Jean-Pierre, we've only got you for about another 10 minutes, so I want to come back to you. If you could just help us, and by the way, to our audience, if anyone has any questions to pose to Jean-Pierre or to any of the other panelists, please feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I've noticed the first one that just came in. We'll try to get to that shortly. But to Jean-Pierre, could you also help us understand where this pact, the Quirinale Treaty, fits into France's broader strategic priorities? Whether it's the proposed rapprochement with Russia, which now appears to be on ice, or the Indo-Pacific strategy that France has laid out. France's priorities in the Eastern Mediterranean more widely, and its strategic defense partnership with Greece. There's a lot of moving pieces here in French foreign policy right now. So where does this pact fit into that puzzle?
I don't, Zachary. Very honestly, I don't share your analysis. Why? Let's remind that this treaty grew on maybe 20 years of crisis, Obviously, 2017, 2019 was a well-known bilateral crisis, but since early 2020s, you had a number of industrial foreign policies problems, bilateral problems between France and Italy. And the very basic assumption that was that Italians wouldn't understand the rationale of French decision-making and vice versa. And French decision-making wouldn't understand. So there is really something, today now we are projecting ourselves, and rightly, on new oceans, okay, in Ukraine, but there is this thing that they need to talk to each other and to understand them, and it's really, I think, something that was maybe not the only one in the European Union, but really strong and really a setback, So there is this need still to take the time to understand the other, and it's not obvious. Once you said that, several of you did mention strategic autonomy, and yes, Italians specifically, I would say, on the industrial side, on this idea, which might be more technological sovereignty, industrial policy, research, space technologies, EU fundings. I mean, Italians have a strong convergence with France. The operational side of a strategic autonomy is much more discussed and to be discussed. So yes, then there is a convergence. And obviously, as you rightly said, Libya and sharing the analysis in Libya, but more deeper than Libya, Africa, also referring to Egypt, are already, important, let's say, field where more convergences could be developed. It's a bit, I think, it's a bit too fast to jump to other conclusions, in terms of outside of NATO, Pacific Indian area. I mean, there is a French vision. Italians are not against it, but they don't share the same perception. I mean, they are still, in a way, very linked to a quite classic NATO, let's say, concept, where French have another type of vision. But I wouldn't put this on the table of the treaty now. It's too soon. It might happen. What Paul Morillas said about the dynamic of EU and the internal dynamic of EU is a very interesting scenario, I guess, and that could contribute for sure. To jump right now to other conclusions, for me, it's too soon.
And what do you anticipate playing out over the next several months as France assumes the EU Council presidency, as well as presidential elections occurring in France? Any shifts in terms of France's potential strategic orientation in that time?
If you are very cynical, and even if you take into consideration, I believe too that Macron can be re-elected. But even if he's not, most of the candidates are quite classic in the French EU policy. So you shall not expect any really brand new thing, okay? Which might be something good. Eventually, Macron will be better, I guess, to dig and to deeper the EU integration, to reform the treaties, to do so. But whatever. So no, there is no real alternative on the table. And even the radical parties, such as Rassemblement National or other, they changed their declaration on that. And I don't think they're going to be elected, however. So, I mean, that's it. The EU presidency, the French EU presidency, has already stated an agenda where, you have a few things which are interesting. I guess, what Ricardo rightly said, the fiscal reform and the treaty, the economical treaty, is an important, the stability measures is an important issue. And for sure, there will be, because Mario Draghi said it after he signed the treaty, there will be somehow an alliance between Italy and France on that side, because they share the same view and they want to enter a dialectic with a new German government. But that's somehow normal. And then Macron did insist on digitalization and on the digital regulation and on the digital industrial policy. And again, I really think that on that side also, with Thierry Breton as a commissioner, there is a strong convergence, which can also be an important part of what we could call a strategic autonomy, at least a technological sovereignty agenda, which is already undergoing. Okay, so that's fine. To push for other things, well, I don't believe in it. Obviously, if things happen in Ukraine, well, history change, but you know that we will see that hopefully or not in a few days or week.
We've only got you for another 5 minutes. I'm just going to give our other panelists an opportunity to come back at anything that you've just said. Did anyone want to jump in to agree or disagree? No, well, good. In that case, let's move on to Germany. In that case, Vanya, over to you.
And I can say goodbye. Thank you very much, because I do apologize, but I have a flight to catch. Goodbye.
We're very grateful that you made time for us at the airport. Merci beaucoup et à la prochaine.
Au revoir.
Au revoir, merci. Rania, over to you. Your sense of the new traffic light coalition, its major priorities, and should we expect change on some fronts or stasis on other fronts as it relates to Germany's foreign policy?
Big question. I think we're probably the new German government is going to differ from the previous one, its predecessor, and where there might be some conflict between France and Italy with the new treaty, and Germany on the other side is really. And I think you're absolutely right, Ricardo, when you were saying the intergovernmental approach is gaining ground. But in the coalition treaty of the traffic light coalition in Germany, they just mentioned that they want to shift the method and move more towards the community method. So move away from the intergovernmentalism more to the supranational, to the European Union institutions. They opt for a stronger EU parliament. Of course, this is all the handwriting from the Green Party, or in large parts. So I guess here we might see maybe I'm not sure whether it's going to be a paradox already, but on the one hand side, we have member states forging closer alliances, which I think basically is a very a good thing. Also, I guess for a country like Germany to have others to come up with ideas, to confront the government with new ideas. I do not think that the position of the previous government has always been very easy. Sometimes they have been, I guess, quite alone in their decision, and this did not help neither Germany nor the integration process. But there might be, nevertheless, this methodological difference between what is going on between France and Italy on the one hand side, and then the new German government opting for a new approach or take on the integration process. Also, I guess I don't know if you read the sentence about strengthening the high rep, the vice president of the European Commission, to really become a true foreign minister. That is also, I guess, something new coming out of Germany, a country which is always aligned with France on the bigger issues of international crisis or crisis management. The Normandie format is just one example, I guess, in case. So there, here again, I'm repeating myself, but it might be this shift in the methodology that like brings our 3-4 countries, if we take Spain and Paul on board, into a somewhat paradoxical situation. Although I agree completely with what Paul says. I mean, we have this unique opportunity of window of opportunity of like-mindeds that want to push for a reform. Maybe want to use the conference on the future of Europe to trigger some important changes. But then how does the intergovernmental and the supranational fit together? This might be one of the of the more difficult issues on a more general level. Then we can, of course, deep dive more into the specific areas of politics. But this, I guess, seems to be some kind of a sea change. We will see whether it's hold. But for now, Germany really wants to try this different approach in the integration process.
Now, a three-party coalition will have some interesting decision-making dynamics. So who do you think are the real decision makers in this new government, and how much stock should other European partners put in the new Chancellor Olaf Scholz's ability to advance his agenda and get things done?
Well, I think he made quite clear that the Chancellor's office and the Chancellor himself will stay the center of gravity in Germany when it comes to EU and foreign and security and politics. Of course, he had to hand over the foreign ministry to the Greens, but they are not very strongly positioned, I guess, or they did not position themselves. That is my personal assessment. They did not position themselves strongly enough on the European issue. I mean, if you follow the first interviews and the first press conferences Annalena Baerbock, our new foreign minister, gave on the international arena, it was more to bring climate more to the forefront, to have this climate foreign policy driven by climate concerns and issues. It's not so much European issues that were high on her agenda. So she really tries to reformulate a whole new narrative of German foreign policy, I guess. And on the other hand, we have a new defense minister who is one of, she is very close to Olaf Scholz. And I guess it was not as a surprise for those who knew who know the party a bit better from the inside that she would move from justice to security and defense, or defense. She would become defense minister because she has really Olaf Scholz has a direct line with our new defense minister. So you see that here again, he really tries to strengthen his position as the stumbling stone, or the one that you cannot come across when it comes to European and also foreign and security political decisions. But maybe just one remark. I don't know if you share that one, but for me as a citizen, German citizen, it was interesting to read the coalition treaty. If you do remember the 2018 coalition treaty, it started with the European and the international chapter. So we had the last Merkel-led government who really said, okay, our focus will lie on Europe. Our approach will be to have this Europe as much together as possible, blah, blah, blah. And then came the internal German agenda. And now it's the other way. It's the other way around. This coalition government, I guess, really sees its first and foremost task in reforming our own country, their own country. And the international and the European arena only comes at a very larger state, not only in the coalition treaty, but I guess also what they really sense as their core task. It's really to make Germany fit for the decades to come, to reshape our economy and to make this country stronger and than it is, make it or prepare it better for the challenges that lie ahead, and then from there on go to the European and the international arena. This is also, I guess, some sort of a shift with regards to the previous government. Sorry, I was too long, but this is an observation I didn't want to. I just wanted to share with you. I don't know if you agree on that.
Well, we do have a follow-up for you, actually, which is that with the change in government in Germany, there is now no major EU member state that has a governing party affiliated with the EPP. So I'm wondering what you think that might imply, actually, for intergovernmental cooperation among EU member states, but also what it might imply for Brussels, and with Ursula von der Leyen maybe trying to advance her own, perhaps, agenda as the last conservative standing, as it were.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting. A point is as well. I haven't thought of this from that angle. I have to confess. We have this here in Germany. We have this very satiric TV show, which is called the Heute Show, and they were just, like celebrating that we now have the first German government with no Bavarians in it. So that is, I guess, very, very much linked to your point in a way. Yeah, I mean, all the more it seems important for the new government as well to align with partners from the liberal or the social democratic spectrum, and the countries here in point have been mentioned already in our round, in our group.
Well, Paul, what's your take on that topic? Because when we saw a transition from the Rajoy government to the Sanchez government, did this lead to any wholesale change in your view in Spain's foreign policy priorities within EU-related matters? And you're on mute, I think.
Sorry. Yeah. Well, I mean, certainly. I mean, well, the starting point is. So far in Spain, whether you had the Popular Party or the PSOE in front, well, both would be in general overall pro-EU governments, right? I mean, and even more so, taking into account that we had never had until now a previous experience of a coalition within in government, right? We had monocolor governments with either only the Popular Party or PSOE as the leading and only party in government. And now, for the first time, we've had a coalition with Podemos, but this is the first time in Spanish democracy, right? And no matter if you had PP or PSOE in the government, both would be pro-EU governments. Well, truth is that during the last years of Rajoy's government, and also due to many internal crises, you had less of a focus on European affairs, also because the Prime Minister was less interested in international affairs than the current government, and particularly Sanchez himself, who's very much prone into EU matters. He speaks fluent English and likes to mingle with the rest of European Council leaders, right? And that translated into not so much lack of presence of Spain in the main debates, always been there and always with a pro-EU position, but yes, with less of an agenda when it comes to making specific proposals. And if you look back now with the current government at the proposals on what is now the EU Recovery Fund, or on strategic autonomy, or on many other files, Spain is really behind many of the ideas or the consensus that have been generated after the pandemic, not always getting the credit that Germany or France will have necessarily, but yes, being at least able to put forward policy papers, to put forward policy options that make it not only a pro-EU government, but also a constructive government when it comes to redesigning the policies and the issues that are under discussion. And I think that here Spain has made considerable steps forward in the last few months or couple of years, and particularly comparing to before. One thing that stands at odds with Spain and refers to what you were mentioning now on intergovernmental EU versus supranational EU and so on, is that there is an inherent contradiction within the Spanish leadership of being very pro-European on the one hand, and thus wanting to reinforce Europe as a whole and the Commission and the supranational methods of integration, and really the federal union at the end of the road and so on. This is one side that has always been the preferred course of action for this particular government, and on the other hand, playing a bigger role in EU politics and EU power politics that is taking shape as we speak, when the Italians and the French sign an agreement, or when the Germans and the France have a long-standing relationship that needs no further agreements than the one that already exists, right? So Spain somehow is navigating through this contradiction. That would mean I want to be a bigger player in the European Council and in the Council in general. I want to be a cornerstone of European integration matters, and everything needs to go through Madrid as well as Rome, Paris, or Berlin, on the one hand, and on the other, still being very pro-EU, pro-Commission, pro-supranationalist method. And this is something that Spain is experiencing now. So far, it's still the right equilibrium. It's still happening, and no major contradiction exists. But when it will come to core aspects, say Gibraltar, if it turns to be an important point with the new Brexit rivalries, or when it comes to Kosovo, for instance, that these are clear red lines of Spanish politics, well, then here Spain will have to take sides on this double direction that we were mentioning before.
Understood. Thanks very much. Just a reminder to our audience that our panel ends at 5:30 p.m. Central European time, so please do stay with us for the next half an hour or so, and that gives us ample time to address your questions. Before I go back to Ricardo, we do have two questions that are directed to Ronya, so I'll just pose them to you right now. I'll pose them together. One is that the Quirinale Treaty includes a focus on the aerospace industry. So what does that imply for Germany, which is one of the bigger suppliers of the aerospace industry in Europe? That's question number one. And question number two is that what is the anticipated new position of the German government on the submarine deal with Turkey? Will we see an alignment of Germany and France on the Eastern Mediterranean?
Yeah, thank you very much for the two questions. Excellent ones, of course. I probably, if you allow me, I will start with the second question, the Turkey question, so to say. I think in comparison to the previous government, this one seems to be more free when it comes to its relation with Turkey, or less binded, so to say. I think the Merkel government, especially since 2015 and the refugee crisis, were so dependent on Turkey and the deal that we have, all of us, with Turkey, that it was always very difficult for the country, of course, to take any position directed towards Turkey. Of course, we also have a huge Turkish community within Germany, all very much pro Erdogan. So very strong interference of the Turkish government on our domestic agenda. The government now, the new coalition government, I guess, has more leverage. First, because it has this policy of that dichotomy between we are the alliance of democracies, and we want to have an outspoken policy against authoritarian regimes, of which Turkey definitely is one. The new government will have, or tries to establish, a more positive take on migration, on refugee. It will be more open, more welcoming, although this runs maybe counter to what France has to do, and especially Macron has to do in order to become re-elected in spring on April next year. But so you are less dependent on someone to hold back refugees. On the other hand, so this could open room for more Franco-German agreements on how to deal with Turkey. especially a Turkey that is more and more weak due to the economic crisis that the country faces. But we do have, with the Greens, of course, a party in power now that has an extremely normative agenda, also in foreign and security politics, where the issues of arms exports has always been very sensitive. And so it remains to be seen what this government. Sorry, my little daughter is interrupting me. No. No. Okay, probably. Sorry. So whether this government can really agree on any form of arms exportation. It tries to be more connected on that, or that's at least what they pretend. They want to be more aligned with their European partners on this issue. But I guess it's difficult to answer this questions. On the one hand, I would say more flexibility in some form of new relations with Turkey, more room for the Franco-German partnership. On the other hand, when it comes to armaments and armaments exports, I guess we will not, it might be even more difficult given the normative approach of the Greens on various questions. I don't know if I have already been too too long, if there is other questions, or whether I shall take the aeronautic question as well. The first one.
If you'd like to address it in a minute or two, we're very grateful that between flights and children, our panelists clearly have a lot of responsibilities to juggle. So thank you for that.
No, well, I think what is interesting for me also when it comes to what we saw in the strategic compass of the European Union, where of course the draft version is circulating. This huge momentum that the space domain gains in the European arena. I think it will be interesting to see, how our security and defense policy is going to evolve, because all the and I think Jean-Pierre already mentioned it, all the areas that are driven by the European Commission seem to be extremely gaining in weight and seem to run really smooth, and there is a lot of investment, a lot of money, and everything, whereas those areas of politics where member states are still in the driver's seat, so the classical CSDP, so to say, advance at a much slower path. And so I guess the question for every government, but also for the new German government, is which ways do you want to, or does the government want to employ to advance CSDP? Will it stick to the member states driven, petit pas, so very small steps, incremental approach, or will it more align with the Commission and put more emphasis on the areas where the Commission is in the driver's seat, so space, digital, satellites, especially, to name just those three.
That's great. Thank you very much. With our remaining 25 minutes, I'd like to situate these recent developments in some of the bigger strategic challenges that the European Union faces. So, we've seen in the recent German coalition agreement strong language for the first time on China, no longer considering China to be a strategic partner, but rather more of a strategic challenge. And we know that France as well has been quite active in the Indo-Pacific region, in relative terms compared to other member states, not least of which because of their territory in the region. Riccardo, I was wondering if you could help us understand how Italy is thinking about those questions, about the Indo-Pacific, about China, and what sort of deliberations we should expect between Italy and Germany and France on those issues.
Yeah, I will go into that in a minute. First, I just wanted to go back to a point I made in my one of my previous remarks that was picked up again by Ronia. the point about intergovernmental policy making in the EU. It is important here to underline that the French-Italian treaty is not meant to support intergovernmental policy making at the EU level. It is meant to support intergovernmental policy making below the EU level so that the French and the Italians have greater leverage when it comes to intra-EU formal negotiations. This means that the treaty is actually very much compatible in the eyes of the French and the Italians with proposals for instance, extending qualified majority voting systems to more areas than it is currently the case. One area in which the Italians and the French definitely want more integration and therefore less veto power is macroeconomic and fiscal governance, which we haven't debated that much, but it is absolutely crucial to understand the reason why this treaty was signed this year. And the other area is migration. A couple of days ago, Macron presented what it might probably be the French EU presidency agenda, and he said something very interesting. He said we need to elevate the Schengen area to a degree of governance comparable to the eurozone governance system. And I guess my hunch is that the Italians and Draghi in particular are very much in favor of that, because they are really tired of the kind of vetoes they constantly receive from Eastern member states or from member states in Central and Eastern Europe. And again, this goes back to the point of what does intergovernmental policy making means in this context is about intra-EU balances of power. The Italians, and probably the French too, really feel that the 2010s have seen a strong thrust in the center of gravity. I've seen a shift of the center of gravity in the EU towards north, as far as fiscal and economic rules are concerned, and towards east, as far as migration and foreign policy are concerned. And they do believe that Germany, because of a number of reasons, economic reasons, geostrategic, geoeconomic reasons, even historical reasons, is very much fond of channeling the expectations and sensitivities of the Central and Eastern member states onto the EU platform, just as Germany was fond of doing the same, especially in the early 2010s, for the northern countries when it came to how to deal with the sovereign debt crisis in the eurozone. So the idea of having the French and the German and the Italians coordinate more structurally and more regularly on issues they do see eye to eye, the eurozone governance and migration, for instance, is also a way for the French and the Italians to create a stronger pole within the EU, which, by the way, might even channel the expectations and sensitivities of countries in the south, Portugal, Spain, Greece, not in the sense that the French and the Italians would become the spokespersons for this country. Absolutely not. That's not the way it works. But in the sense that they will create a magnet more capable of attracting also the interest and the positions of these countries, and therefore go to and on that basis go to the negotiating table in the EU and have a greater say, because we saw two rounds of confrontation, especially over the economic governance of the Union. And I know I'm digressing from your question about Russia and China, but I can assure you it's very much related to that. Very much related to that. The first round was won hands down by the frugal or financially healthier countries in the north, led or championed or channeled by Germany. The second round was because of the extraordinary nature of the COVID-induced economic crisis or even catastrophe, by the countries advocating for greater fiscal solidarity. This victory is indeed impressive, but it's temporary. Paul was mentioning that before. It's temporary. So what to do of next generation EU and all other instruments that have been activated and that are still meant, especially in the minds of the frugal countries, to be one-shot initiatives. What to make of those initiatives, what to make of the much expanded power of the European Commission to borrow money on financial markets, that's going to be the next battleground of intra-EU negotiations. And this treaty, in the hopes of Macron and Draghi, will have the French and the Italian and all those who support giving further momentum to this integration of fiscal solidarity thrust, will help to that extent. Whether that will be possible or not, it's very much to be seen. But certainly, you are now seeing these countries which were in a defensive position in the early 2010s, now getting more organized and more capable of becoming proactive and challenging the blocking power of the veto champions, the northern countries, as far as the governance of the eurozone is concerned, and the eastern countries as far as migration is concerned. And again, the Belarus weaponization of migrants actually has played into France's and less so Italy's hands in this regard, because they have finally some evidence to show that solidarity, the solidarity that Poland asked for, is something Poland did not provide Italy and France with, especially Italy, in the mid-2010s. And therefore, now they have a case for doing that. Now they have a case for advocating more solidarity and a kind of migration governance similar to the Eurozone governance too. And of course, the Belarus weaponization, the Belarus-Poland border issue is an issue very much related to relations with Russia. So finally, going back to your question about how Italy sees relations with France, with China and Russia. Here, Draghi is really making the difference. So whatever I would be saying now might be, unfortunately, very much limited to the time period in which Draghi will remain in office, because future governments might have different ideas. But Draghi has clear ideas. He does see Russia and China as really problematic interlocutors. And he knows that the main instrument for Italy to protect itself from whatever vulnerabilities Russia and China may exploit are the EU and NATO, or the transatlantic relationship. So Draghi is more willing to lend support to EU and NATO measures to confront Russia and China's influence than probably previous governments were. This said, Draghi is also very much a pragmatic guy, just as Macron is. So if he sees an opportunity for having dialogue, detente with Russia, he probably will consider that. And so this stokes the Biden administration has accepted to open with Russia over Europe's security space is something the Italians are very much in support of, because they have been advocating that for many, many years, although they did advocate for that mostly before things with Russia really went south. And with China, look, in 2019, Italy signed off on a memorandum of understanding in support of the Belt and Road Initiative. 2 years on, the memorandum of understanding hasn't produced any tangible results for China, not even for Italy, actually. If it has produced an effect, it has been counterproductive, in the sense that the Italians have strengthened the screening mechanism, the screening investment mechanism quite considerably. investment screening mechanism, sorry, quite considerably. And Draghi has been the prime minister most willing to use that screening mechanism to block transactions, takeovers or mergers of Italian companies deemed strategic with Chinese companies or by Chinese companies. This said, look, I'm pretty sure that Draghi considers and this is perhaps something the French, the Italian, and the Germans might at one point really agree on. I know that Draghi considers the comprehensive agreement on investment with China something that it is in the interest of the European Union, because it rebalances a bit the position of EU companies with those of the US companies, which, by the way, are still profiting from the phase one agreement the Trump administration struck with Beijing in early 2020. And he is sure that the EU is the only way you can continue to interact, as you cannot afford not doing, economically and trade-wise with China from a position of relative strength. So I wouldn't be surprised if in a few months' time, certain things, including the sanction issue, having changed a bit, you might have a German, Italian, French push for putting again the CAI, the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment between the EU and China, on the table for the European Parliament to discuss and eventually ratify.
Thanks very much. Paul, there's the conventional narrative out there, which is basically that with Germany in a post-Merkel era having a three-party government, it's going to leave it a little bit more paralyzed and sidelined from some of the major debates on the future of Europe. And therefore, this new Franco-Italian pact is going to allow for a reorientation of the strategic center of gravity within Europe. But there's this counter-argument which says that because of Germany's sheer weight, one way or another, you can't move forward on major European integration issues without German acquiescence. So what's your sense of this, and what do you think the sense is of leaders in Southern Europe on this question as well?
Yeah, well, I would place myself in the second part of the argument that you put forward right now. I mean, to be honest, yes, of course, the coalition government in Germany, being a green light coalition and having three parties, yes, will be tougher to agree on every single issue, and more things will be needed to be discussed first internally to then have a coherent position at the EU level on many of the aspects that we have been mentioning in the last hour or so. But nonetheless, I mean, I don't think it's in the interest of anyone at this point to just basically sideline Germany on any of the big files that we are discussing, right? I mean, if it be the macroeconomic and fiscal rules that Ricardo was mentioning right now, or be the migration and the east-west breaking up of the EU that has been witnessed before, Germany will still be the key player, right? I mean, no matter who is in office, and even more, as Ronja was saying before, Scholz will be a key player in that coalition when it comes to foreign policy matters or European policy matters. So the Chancellor is still very powerful, regardless of the three parties that are in there. Yes, probably the Greens will try to rebalance a bit the power of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs compared to the Merkel times, but still, I mean, the Chancellor will still be the Chancellor. So I don't think anyone is really interested in saying, well, Germany will be left aside on the power game at the EU level, because first and foremost, I don't think it's feasible. What I think is an opportunity for Southern Europe, and this is something to be explored. Well, I mean, let me put it this way. When it comes to groupings at the EU level, Southern Europe has always been the difficult one to mobilize, right? I mean, yes, the Frugals, fine, they're doing fine, they had an agenda. Yes, Franco-German alliance is there forever, and that will never change. Or, well, You know what I mean? The Visegrad countries have had a very forceful attitude on many things. The Southerners have had more of a hard time in getting a unified voice when it comes to this regionalization of EU politics. And that is something that right now might start to change, right? Because for how long Draghi lasts, we'll see. But with Sanchez and Draghi still being important actors, with Portugal, well, having gone through different times, and with France also still with the pro-EU Macron government, there is an opportunity there for the South to have, or not to have a different say on EU things, because sometimes it will be aligned on many of the files, but at least have a stronger Southern voice when it comes to this regionalization of EU politics. And this is where I think also it is in Spain's interest to put forward that view of EU politics. Again, this doesn't mean to go against the general EU interest, because as I said before, Spain will always be there in that sense of pro-EU government, right? But that said, I think this stronger Southern voice will need to be worked on and to see. The big elephant in the room here is when all these changes happen, when all these discussions start to take hold, when we are really rediscussing the Stability Pact, and when we are thinking about, as Macron said, a eurozone Schengen sort of way of very strong cooperation, well, at some point, then the need for treaty change will be there, right? And this elephant in the room that we haven't been able to uncover for a long time, and that even the Conference on the Future of Europe hasn't really wanted to tackle that difficult question, well, at some point this will be necessary. Then the big game will start, right? And I think we've been waiting for that moment to materialize for a long time, and probably with all the files that we have in our hands now, well, that time is fast approaching. I don't know when it will approach, but it's fast approaching, and France here particularly has a plan after April and during the first times of the second Macron government, if that is to happen.
Okay, we've only got 8 minutes left, so I would just like to leave our audience with some key takeaways. I'm just going to go around the horn and would like to ask each of you, starting with Anya and then on to Ricardo and finish with Paul, about what are, with these recent developments in mind, recent German coalition agreement and the recent Franco-Italian pact, what are the 2 or 3 things that need to happen in order for a more joined up EU foreign policy to emerge in the months and years ahead? Anya, go ahead.
Okay, I guess two. I have two. Two things that come to my mind.
And 2 minutes each, please, if that's okay.
Okay. What aligns Italy and France at the moment are common interests. What has always separated them from one another is the question of sustainable leadership. This differs, or this is different in the Franco-German relationship. We have always come from different ends, and because of that, we have always been able to forge a consensus that was largely acceptable, not only to one part of the European Union, but to most parts of the European Union. So I guess we have to see how this plays out, because I'm always also admitting that I guess the German approach under especially the last Merkel a government has not reunited Germany, the European Union, sorry. We have all these different groupings. And so that, I guess, is one of the things that we will try to find the right mix between a regional approach that is inclusive, a Franco-German approach that is even more inclusive without a Germany being only focusing on, like the 27, the least common denominator. So I think this is the right mix. And then I guess the second issue is what Paul mentioned. When is the right time for treaty changes, and can we all agree? We have a very short window of time, which is from January 1st, 2022, I guess, until at least the elections in Italy in 2023, if Macron survives the presidential elections in April 2022.
Thanks so much, Rania. Ricardo, over to you.
Well, I think there are 3 or 4 elements. The first is that pro-EU forces, at least in the big EU countries, should remain in power for a relatively extended period of time. And by pro-EU, I mean forces that are willing and have ideas and proposals to reform EU policy making and EU policies. And Macron certainly has a lot of ideas. Draghi might support some of those ideas and might lend those his unmatchable authority or credibility. And let's see what happens in Germany. That's really, really important, because Germany pulling its weight behind the project of reforming EU governance, macroeconomic governance is critical, but it's also important that Germany starts pulling its weight also behind other components of the EU policy agenda, which, by the way, may well fall into the category of strategic autonomy. So, for instance, the French, especially, but also the Italians, are very much in favor of the Digital Market Act, of the Digital Services Act, and they're also in favor of this new anti-coercion mechanism toolbox, which the European Commission has been working on for months now. And I think the German businesses might very much be keen on exploring how those anti-coercion measures can be made, can work also for them. It is really important for the EU to equip itself with instruments capable of reducing its vulnerability to the political use of asymmetrical interdependencies by other powers, especially global powers, Russia on the energy front, China on the market access, to mention one front, but also the United States with recent weaponization of financial interaction. And third, you wouldn't believe that, but I think it is very important. It would be really important for perhaps the last purely strongly Atlanticist US administration to abandon its concerns about, its very misplaced concerns about strategic autonomy, and push Germany, push Poland, push the Central Eastern European states to pursue a greater European Union capacity to act internationally. I'm not, but
thank you very much. Lots to think about there, and obviously we'll keep that in mind as we potentially see U.S.-Russian negotiations, along with 4, I believe, Western European NATO allies, and we're going to see very interestingly what that looks like, seeing as the Central and Eastern European allies of NATO appear to be excluded from that process, at least according to initial reports. Paul, the last word is yours.
Yeah, and very, very, very quick, because we're running out of time. But I want to second Ricardo on what he just said on strategic autonomy. I think that is a crucial file. And I would say that the more we distance ourselves from a single understanding of strategic autonomy on the basis of security and defense, and we try to understand strategic autonomy on multiple external action fronts, and that includes cyber, or that includes the digital, or that includes energy, or even migration issues. So the more we broaden the concept that strategic autonomy is about EU being capable of taking its share in specific files, well, the better it will be, both internally and with outside powers, to understand that Europe is acting as an actor in world politics. And I think that strategic autonomy has been too much placed on security and defense matters only, and it is ripe time to expand it to this more external action understanding, because at the end of the day, this is what responds to Europe's DNA. It's not a security and defense actor. It's an actor that understands foreign policy through different lenses. So I think strategic autonomy, or European sovereignty, or many words for the same thing, need to also evolve in that direction. And finally, also, I think that the biggest file, and particularly for Italy, particularly for Spain, is to show that the recovery fund has been worth it, and to spend the money, that huge amount of money that is allocated to both countries, in a wise way, and also trying to not cede the grounds for the next populists to come, be that from the side of those that say the Southerners just waste the money, or or that they are incapable to reform. I think this is the big file that we will have in the coming months, also years, but particularly months. And here, Italy and Spain have a big role to play.
That's a great and thought-provoking note on which to end. And obviously, there's much more to unpack, but we're out of time. And so hopefully we'll be able to do that in the new year. In the meantime, muchas gracias y feliz Navidad. Grazie mille, buon Natale. Vielen Dank und frohe Weihnachten. And we will see you all in the new year. In the meantime, if you'd like some holiday reading, please feel free to check out our website, ceps.eu. That's ceps.eu. Until the next time. Thank you so much.
Bye, Zach.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Ciao.
Take care.